I saw my wife whispering with my best friend during our 20th anniversary dinner. Her face was just inches from his, their laughter soft and private, like I wasn't even there. Something inside me twisted. I told myself it was just the champagne or a friendly joke, but my gut wouldn't let it go. So I quietly called one of the waiters I'd known for years and told him to listen in, just for a moment. When he came back and whispered what he'd heard, the room spun. The music, the laughter, the celebration, it all disappeared. That was the moment I realized my entire life had been a lie. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life revenge stories like this one, and comment your country name below. I'd love to know where you're watching from. My name is David Carson, and that night, the night of my 20th wedding anniversary, I learned that sometimes the people you love most can be the ones holding the knife behind your back. We were celebrating at the Grand Oaks restaurant in Chicago, a place I'd booked months in advance. Everything was perfect. The candlelight, the soft music, the laughter of our guests. My wife Samantha looked stunning, red dress, diamonds sparkling under the chandelier. My best friend Eric sat across from us, flashing that easy smile he'd always had. I remember thinking how lucky I was. 20 years of marriage, 3 beautiful kids, Ethan, Olivia, and Ryan, and a friendship with a man I trusted like a brother. Life had been good to me, until that moment. Halfway through the evening, I noticed Samantha and Eric leaning close. Too close. She touched his hand. He whispered something in her ear. They laughed, heads tilted together like they shared a secret joke. I froze, mid-toast, watching as her lips brushed dangerously near his cheek. My heart started to pound. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe the music was too loud and they had to speak closer. But the way her hand lingered on his arm, that wasn't just friendship, that was familiarity. So I made a decision. Quiet, calculated. I called over Mark, a waiter I'd known for years. "Keep your distance," I told him, slipping a $100 bill into his hand. "But listen, I need to know what they're talking about." He hesitated for a second, glanced between me and them, then nodded. A few minutes later, he returned, his face pale. "Sir," he whispered, leaning close, "you don't want to know." "Tell me," I insisted. His words hit me harder than a gunshot. She said, he swallowed hard. She said, "Look at this idiot. He's bringing up our children, paying their school fees, every expense. We're living like kings and he doesn't even know these kids aren't his." My glass shattered in my hand. I didn't even feel the cut. All I felt was the cold rush of disbelief flooding through me. "Are you sure?" I asked. Mark nodded, eyes wide with sympathy. In that moment, my world stopped. The laughter around me blurred into a distant hum. My wife, the woman I loved for 2 decades, and my best friend, the man I trusted with my life, had built their happiness on my ignorance. For 20 years, I'd been raising his children, paying for their dreams, protecting a family that wasn't even mine. I stared across the room at Samantha. She caught my eye, smiled sweetly, completely unaware that her secret was unraveling. I stood up quietly, excused myself from the table, and walked outside. The cold Chicago air slapped me across the face, but I needed that. I needed something real to remind me I was still alive. My hands shook as I lit a cigarette, something I hadn't done in years. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything. I thought about every late-night argument, every unexplained trip, every time she told me, "You're just being paranoid." She wasn't just lying. She was mocking me. And Eric, my so-called brother. I remembered when I helped him start his first business, loaned him money when he was broke, trusted him with my home, my kids, my wife. The realization twisted inside me until anger replaced the shock. But I didn't storm back in. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a drink in their faces. I'd been a successful businessman my entire life. I knew that the best revenge was never loud. It was calculated. That night I walked back in, smiled as if nothing happened, kissed my wife's cheek, and raised a toast to 20 more years. Eric laughed, Samantha beamed, and I pretended everything was fine, while inside, I was planning everything. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I went into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and said to myself, "David, this ends today." I called my lawyer, James Rourke, and told him to prepare the divorce papers. Then I contacted my financial advisor. I wanted every asset reviewed. I wasn't going to lose a single cent to a woman who played me for a fool. When Samantha woke up, she acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed in the kitchen, making breakfast, and kissed my cheek like she hadn't stabbed me in the heart the night before. But I wasn't that man anymore. I smiled back, finished my coffee, and told her I had an important meeting downtown. She nodded, completely unaware that my meeting was with a private investigator, one who specialized in DNA and infidelity cases. By the end of that week, I had all the proof I needed. DNA tests confirmed it. None of the 3 children were biologically mine. Not one. I sat in my office, staring at those results for hours. 20 years. 20 years of birthday parties, bedtime stories, school trips, scraped knees, and college savings, all for children that weren't mine. But they were innocent. I couldn't hate them. My rage wasn't toward them. It was toward her. That night, I came home and sat across from Samantha at dinner. She was scrolling on her phone, smiling at something. Probably a message from Eric. I asked her softly, "Do you love him?" She froze. "What are you talking about?" I said. I repeated calmly, "Do you love Eric?" Her face drained of color. "David, what are you—" "Because if you do," I said, cutting her off, "then you'll love what's coming next." Her fork clattered to the table. "You're scaring me." "Good," I said, standing up. "You should be." And then, without another word, I walked out, because the real revenge hadn't even started yet. The moment I walked out of the dining room that night, something inside me changed. It was as if a door that had been locked for 20 years suddenly swung open, and the air that rushed in was cold and honest. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to accuse. Noise would only feed their performance, their practiced innocence and their tiny, cruel smiles. I wanted something cleaner. Proof, margins, legal knives sharpened and ready. I would cut the lie out of my life and stitch myself back together on the other side. I drove without thought to a tiny office in Lincoln Park where James Rourke, my attorney, had his practice. He and I had been friends longer than I'd known Samantha. The city lights reflected off I-90 like a string of fractured diamonds. When the doors opened, I saw James already waiting, the same weary look he wore when a case smelled of deception. "David," he said, standing, "you look like hell." "I need to end this," I said. He nodded for me to sit. "Tell me everything." So I told him, from the way Samantha's hand lingered on Eric's arm to the waiter's whispered report. I told him the exact wording, the tone, the look on her face when she thought no one was watching. James listened, unmoved. He'd seen rage before, but he also knew I wasn't a man of theatrics. He knew I wanted a plan. "You want truth?" he asked when I finished. "We build evidence. DNA, financials, communications. We make sure the court sees the whole picture. Not a husband acting out of jealousy, but a husband who discovered a calculated, 20-year deception." I told him to begin. Not to contact Samantha. Not to threaten. Quietly. Precisely. He recommended a private investigator, someone who could move through circles and leave no fingerprints. He called Ivy Lane Investigations, a small firm on the south side known for discretion. I told Ivy to start with hotels, phone records, and suspicious bank transfers. I wanted every breadcrumb. For the next 2 days, I wore my ordinary life like a coat I'd taken off and draped over a chair. To the world, I was the same man who kissed his wife in front of neighbors, the same father who took pictures at Little League games. But under that coat, I was assembling a new identity, a man who would no longer fund someone else's lie. At the end of the week, Ivy called me into a small back room at a cafe near River North. The investigator's face was tight, thin, as if she'd swallowed something bitter. "We have confirmations," she said without preamble. "Multiple. Hotel records show frequent stays under aliases for Samantha and Eric in at least 3 hotels in the city over the last 10 years. We pulled geolocation from a secondary phone. The movements match. Also, we have copies of wire transfers from an account in Eric's name to a safety deposit box in Oak Brook. The DNA. We'll need a sample. Messy, but doable." My hands drummed on the table. "What about the kids?" "They're not biologically yours," she said bluntly. "We need court-authorized DNA to finalize, but we've got enough for a high-confidence preliminary determination. If you want it public, you'll need a judge to sign the order." I thought of Olivia asleep in her room 2 nights ago. The little mound of hair on her pillow. Ethan with his awkward grin trying to throw a baseball. I thought of Ryan's endless questions about trucks and work, how he followed me around like a shadow. None of that changed the truth I'd learned, but it hammered home the stakes of what I planned to do. I wasn't going to abandon my children. I would not let them be collateral in this cleanup. My anger was for Samantha and Eric, not the kids. Ivy left with instructions. "Do this clean, David. Don't let them smell the kettle boiling until it whistles." I consented to a discreet DNA test. I wanted it done without their knowledge, a hair from a brush, a fork trace on a glass. It felt wrong to steal even in retaliation, but I needed the court evidence. The result arrived, and it was as cold as I feared. None of the 3 children shared my genetic markers. There were no paternal matches. The shock went beyond anger. It was grief. I took the report straight to James. "Serve the divorce on grounds of adultery, fraud, and constructive desertion," James advised. "Revoke their access to joint accounts immediately. File for temporary restraining orders on asset transfers. We'll ask the court to freeze major accounts while we investigate." I signed the papers. James prepared everything with the precision of a surgeon. Everything had to be right: timing, language, presentation. The last thing I wanted was to be undone by a petty technicality. But first, I needed Samantha to feel something besides the thrill of anonymity. I wanted the cruelty of the discovery to hit her in the same way his words had hit me. Sudden, public, absolute. So I made the party vanish. The anniversary gala had been planned for months. Invitations mailed to close friends and relatives, table cards printed, the band ready to play Sinatra, and champagne lined up in silver ice. When I called the caterer and the venue in the morning, I asked them to hold the event for a while, to delay by 2 hours. The plan was to trigger a moment and then watch the fallout as my carefully laid legal steps took effect. Meanwhile, I called my old friend Charles Whitaker, the one who'd once stood as a groomsman and been my confidant. I asked him to invite Eric to the office under the guise of discussing a business investment Eric had always pined for. Charles called and convinced Eric to meet him. It was the perfect wedge. Get Eric away from Samantha at a precise moment when he would least expect it. By late afternoon, I filed the motions. James handed me the stack of documents: divorce complaint, temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions. I sat in my car outside the venue watching the world I had once loved move in patterns of laughter and ease. My chest was heavy, but my hands were steady. On the inside, I felt a cold clarity. This was about truth, about extracting myself and my children from a fortress of lies. It was not a triumph for me to take everything they thought belonged to them. It was mercy, and to myself, to my kids, to whatever remained of integrity in that family. I sent a text to Samantha, one I crafted to sting but not to inflame. "There's no point in pretending any longer. Please step outside." It hit her with the same force the waiter's whisper had hit me. She stood puzzled, took her clutch, and walked outside into the twilight to find me waiting. "David?" she said, smiling in that practiced way of someone who expects control. "You liked last night's toast," I said. "You made it sound like you loved me for 2 decades. Her smile faltered. "Are we doing this now? Please don't make a scene." I held her stare and then said calmly, "I'm done asking." As she stared, disbelief turned to fear and curled into anger. "You'll make a fool of yourself in front of everyone," she snapped. "Maybe," I said, "but maybe you'll finally understand how it feels to be humiliated." "You didn't realize it could happen from the inside." She bit her lip. "You can't do this. Watch me." Inside, the band struck a note, soft and sweet. The room hummed with unaware voices. Samantha gasped as the caterer approached, his face pale. and handed her a court document, a temporary restraining order halting her access to joint bank accounts and requiring her to remain off the property pending a hearing. It was as if the room inhaled and forgot to exhale. Murmurs surged like tidewater. She clutched the paper as if it were a talisman. Its printed words felt like cold weights. Across town, Charles tapped his foot in Eric's office and then, at the appointed minute, excused himself and handed Eric a file. "Look at these. David's been very generous over the years. I think it's time you thought about consolidating." Eric laughed, unaware, until his phone buzzed with a stream of messages. He read the first: urgent, civil suit filed, adultery and fraud claims. His face drained. Then another message: temporary freeze placed on major personal accounts. He stared, then looked at the file in Charles's hands and realized with dawning horror those bank statements and shell company links were not the investments he'd hoped would be his when they were legal evidence of a life he'd been allowed to leech. Had no joy in watching his expression crumble. Only a stern, terrible satisfaction that the false gods they had worshipped, secrecy, deceit, greed, were being stripped away. News travels fast at an anniversary. Friends rose from tables in clusters, whispering, phones raised to check rumors. The band faltered and stopped. A silence fell so thick it could be heard under the chandeliers. My kids, Olivia and the boys, stood in the center of the floor, confusion and fear etched on their small faces. I moved to them and took each of their hands. My heart was a furnace and an anchor. "Samantha," I said to the room, "I filed for divorce this morning." An audible intake of breath. Conversations fractured into shards. "You lied to me for 20 years, I continued, looking at her, not at the crowd. "You and Eric lived a double life. I will not be complicit." The waiter Mark stood at my elbow and swallowed. He had been integral to the first whisper that started it all, and I nodded to him, grateful. Samantha's face twisted into a mask of reclaimed composure, then fury. "You're insane," she spat. "You'll regret this." "How dare you?" But the crowd had already closed in a protective ring of distance. People who once cut me sideways with their eyes now looked at me, some with sympathy, others with shocked curiosity. The event that was meant to celebrate our love had become a cleansing flame, burning the rot away. As the night tore into chaos and with lawyers whispering, friends reeling, and my children clinging to me, I felt the exact sensation I wanted to feel: a release. The old life, built on a fragile lie, had been exposed. It hurt, yes. The Au Courant wisdom said to show mercy and forgive. But mercy built on ignorance isn't mercy. It's complicity. Over the next week, the legal machinery I had set in motion moved faster than Samantha could have imagined. Accounts were frozen. The property holdings were reviewed. James ensured that legal protections were in place to prevent asset stripping. I petitioned the court not to award temporary custody or movement of the children until a guardian ad litem could be appointed to look after their best interests. They were innocent, and I refused to let parental warfare scar them further. The daily news reports from my small circle of acquaintances echoed the public shock. Whispers grew into questions. How could he not have known? I did know, in a way. I knew the signs I had missed. What I hadn't known was the brazen scale of the deception. Samantha and Eric tried to make public statements about stress and misunderstanding. Eric, in particular, struck a contrite pose in front of the cameras the second week, the image of a sorry man. But private documents in Ivy's report said otherwise. Hotel logs, hotel receipts, private messages. It was all evidence, and my legal team filed it meticulously. Then came the financial hearings. Courtroom light is a different thing from restaurant lighting. It's stark, white, and merciless. My lawyer, James, laid out the trust issues, the shell companies, and a history of transfers that suggested a second life of spending and advantage undertaken by Samantha and Eric. The presiding judge looked down at Samantha with an expression that felt like a verdict before the last word was spoken. There were moments when my resolve wavered. I watched my children and felt a lungs-deep ache. But then Olivia would reach for my hand in the afternoon and tell me a small story about school. And Ethan would bring home a drawing of a truck with a heart in the center and say, "Dad, this is for you." And the surge of love combined with anger became something that steadied me into new purpose. My choice was to be present for them in a way I had been naive about, not as a provider for others' children, but as a father for mine still and always. Word traveled beyond our social cluster. An old mentor from Evanston called me and said, "David, you did the right thing. People will judge, but you found truth." Another woman dropped flowers on our porch with a note. "You deserve better than deceit." Those small gestures meant more to me than any legal victory. Samantha fought back in petty ways. Phone calls to acquaintances, barbed texts, and a smear campaign seeded by a few who still wanted to believe their kitchen table versions of the marriage. Eric tried legal threats about reputation and claimed malice. They both underestimated one thing. I had law and truth on my side, and more importantly, I had decided I would no longer cushion their selfishness. One afternoon, when everything seemed at its worst, filings, media, cold calls from relatives demanding explanations, my daughter Olivia climbed into my lap and put her small palm on my cheek. "Daddy," she said, "can we still have pancakes tomorrow?" She was 7. Her voice carried the gospel of simple love, a melody that drowned out the cacophony. I kissed her forehead. "Of course," I said. It was in those small moments I realized the shape my revenge had to take. I could take their money and walk away. I could sue for punitive damages. I could let them rot in shame. Or I could use what I had to repair the future for the innocent in this mess, my children and others like them. That was what Margaret would have wanted. That was the anchor in the sea of my rage. So I added a new motion to the legal proceedings, a demand that any settlements or diverted funds tied to the deception be rerouted into a trust for the children's education and care, and apportioned to a foundation that would support families who had been manipulated or abused financially. The judge, seeing the evidence and the clear intent, granted temporary oversight powers to the court to ensure no funds were depleted improperly. Samantha's face at the hearing was pale and hollow. Eric's jaw was tight. In the gallery, the whispers had turned to murmurs of reproach. The two people who had sipped champagne at my table only a week before now hurried out between lawyers and reporters, their mouths dry. When the judge finally granted a temporary order removing Samantha's signatory powers and placing a limited trusteeship for the marital estate until full adjudication, I felt no vindictive joy. Instead, I felt the calm that comes from correction. The world was not made right in a single stroke, but at least the machinery could now act on truth. The weeks that followed were a mire of depositions and late-night phone calls and interviews. But through it all, I kept returning to the small rituals that mattered. Making pancakes for the kids on rainy Saturdays, sitting through Olivia's school play, coaching Ryan's little league practice. Those small joys were a rehearsal for the life I would build without the lie. One night, after the chaos had relaxed into a brittle normal, I stood on the back porch and looked at the sky above Chicago. The stars were indifferent, which was oddly comforting. I had broken a life that was rotten at its core, but in the process I had rebuilt another that was stronger, because it accepted the truth. The next morning, I walked into the office and began the real work, ensuring that the trust for my children was legally ironclad, that an independent guardian would manage any settlement funds, and that Samantha's and Eric's ability to influence our children, emotionally, financially, would be limited while the court deliberated. I thought of the waiter Mark, of Ivy, of James and Charles, and the small network of people who'd helped me turn the tide. For all of them I felt gratitude, but there was also a lesson etched into my bones. Never again would I confuse gentleness for weakness. And yet, even as I signed documents and arranged meetings, the ache of betrayal never fully eased. Sometimes I would wake at night and find myself replaying the scene at the table, Samantha's face inches from Eric's, her smile that was never for me, and wonder how long a person can rebuild trust with a heart that has been punctured so many times. I realized the answer wasn't immediate. It would be measured over years in proofs and quiet acts. Still, when I tucked Olivia in that evening and she hugged me and said, "Daddy, I like pancakes," I felt whole enough to smile. For that child, for the boys who believed me for their dad, for the quiet sense of justice that had replaced my rage, I would keep building. The law had begun its work. Life would finish it with patience and steadiness. Revenge, I had discovered, is not always spectacle. Sometimes it's an interior architecture you construct carefully, with iron, not flame. The night of shattered glasses and cruel whispers had been the hinge on which my life turned. On the other side of it, there was no perfect closure, only a long, patient rebuilding of what mattered most. After that night, everything about life changed, not slowly, not gradually, but like a hammer crashing down on glass. The moment I stepped out of that banquet hall, leaving behind the dim lights, the fake laughter, the clinking glasses, I felt like I was walking away from a life that was never real. The cold air hit my face as if to wake me up from the dream I'd been living in for 20 years. My wife Laura, the woman I had trusted with my heart, my name, my children, my legacy, had been lying to me all along, and my best friend, the man who stood beside me at my wedding, who held my shoulder when my parents passed away, who borrowed money from me when his own business failed, had been stabbing me in the back while pretending to be my brother. The waiter's words echoed in my mind. They said, "You're the perfect fool, sir. That you pay for everything. That the kids aren't yours. The kids." That thought alone almost brought me to my knees. I got into my car and drove for hours that night. No destination in mind. Just the endless highway, the headlights cutting through the dark, and my thoughts, loud, cruel, merciless thoughts, screaming inside my head. I remembered their faces. My eldest son, Dylan, 19 years old in college, always carried himself with a little too much arrogance, but I thought that was just youth. My younger son, Ethan, 16, gentle, quiet, loved playing the guitar, and my daughter, Sarah, 13, the one who could melt my heart with just a smile. They called me Dad. But now, every time that word echoed in my mind, it hurt like a blade twisting deeper. When I finally reached home, it was almost dawn. I sat in the driveway staring at the front door. The door I had walked through thousands of times, the house I had built with my own hands, brick by brick, for my family. But now it felt foreign. Like a crime scene, I didn't go inside immediately. I sat there for a long time, trying to think clearly. My first instinct was to confront Laura right then and there, to scream, to demand answers, to destroy every lie she ever told me. But then I remembered something my late father once said to me. When betrayal comes from the ones closest to you, don't react with rage. React with intelligence. Make them choke on their own guilt. And that's when my plan began to take shape. By the time Laura woke up that morning, I was sitting at the dining table, calm as a monk, sipping my coffee. She walked in, still in her silk robe, pretending everything was normal. "Good morning, honey," she said, her voice soft, almost fake. I looked at her. "Morning." She smiled faintly, leaning down to kiss my cheek, but I turned my face away just slightly. Enough to make her notice. Her eyes narrowed a bit. "Something wrong?" "Nothing," I said, finishing my coffee. "Just tired." She shrugged it off, poured herself a cup, and sat across from me. For a moment I watched her. The way she acted, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't spent the previous night mocking me with another man. It was almost impressive, her ability to lie so effortlessly. When the kids came downstairs, I couldn't even look at them the same way. I wanted to hug them, but I couldn't. I didn't even know who they were anymore. Dylan said, "Dad, can I borrow the car tonight?" "Sure," I replied, forcing a smile. Laura looked at me, smiling approvingly, like a proud mother watching a perfect family breakfast. It made me sick. That day, I didn't go to the office. I went straight to my lawyer. I told him everything. I didn't tell him names, not yet, but I asked him to draft a new will removing my wife and all 3 kids from inheritance. He looked shocked. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Coleman? That's a major change." "I've never been more sure about anything in my life," I said. Then I asked him for something else, something more personal. A private investigator. Within 48 hours, I had everything I needed: photos, videos, call records, proof, all of it. And when I saw those pictures, my wife and my best friend in hotel rooms, in cars on vacations I thought she was taking with her sisters, that was it. There was no anger left, just emptiness. 2 days later, I staged a little surprise of my own. Laura loved surprises, so I gave her one. That evening, she came home to find the dining table set again, candles lit, wine glasses waiting. She looked delighted. "Oh, Mark, what's this for?" "Just thought we could have a quiet dinner," I said softly. "You know." "Talk," she smiled, sat down. "That's so sweet." Halfway through the meal, I slid an envelope across the table, She looked confused. "What's this?" "Something you might want to see before dessert," I replied. She opened it, and I watched her face turn pale. Inside were the photos. The call logs. The proof of her 20-year lie. Her lips trembled. "Mark, I can explain." "Don't," I interrupted. "I've listened to you for 20 years. I think it's my turn to talk." She tried to reach for my hand. I pulled it back. I leaned forward, my voice low, calm, deadly calm. "I built this family. I sacrificed my youth, my health, my peace, and everything for all of you. And while I was out there working 16-hour days to give you the best life, you were mocking me behind my back." Laughing with him. Calling me an idiot. Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Mark, it wasn't like that." "Oh, it was exactly like that," I said, slamming my hand on the table. The candles flickered. "You said it yourself, that I was paying for his children. That's what you said, right? So tell me, Laura, when did you decide I was no longer worth the truth?" She broke down crying. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake. A 20-year mistake?" I said bitterly. "You don't make a mistake for 20 years. You make a choice." That night she slept in the guest room. The next morning I went to the bank, withdrew half of my savings, and moved them into a private account. Then I called my lawyer again. By the end of that week, the divorce papers were ready, and so was the property transfer. My mansion, my cars, my business shares, everything that once had their names attached, now belonged solely to me. But I didn't stop there. When the kids came home from school, I called them to the living room. "Sit down," I said. They looked confused. Laura stood in the corner, silent. I took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something," and then I told them everything. Every single truth their mother had hidden from them. Sarah started crying. Ethan just froze. "Dylan, though," he exploded. "You're lying." "Mom would never." "She would," I said quietly. "And she did." He turned to Laura, shouting, "Mom, tell me he's lying." Laura didn't answer. That silence said everything. The next morning, I left. I didn't take much, just a suitcase, my documents, and my peace of mind. I moved to a small town in Colorado, far away from everything that once was. A month later, the divorce was finalized. I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't even pick up the phone when the kids called. And a few days after that, my lawyer delivered one final envelope to the family house. Inside was the new will and a letter. It said, "To those who betrayed me, thank you. You've taught me the true value of love, loyalty, and silence. You will receive nothing from me, not because I hate you, but because I finally love myself enough to stop feeding those who hurt me." Months passed. Seasons changed. But the pain, it lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. I had always thought that time could heal anything. But betrayal doesn't just hurt once. It haunts you in flashes. A laugh you remember. A photograph you stumble upon. The sound of a voice you once loved that now feels like poison in your veins. Colorado had become my safe haven. My cabin by the lake was quiet, surrounded by pine trees and crisp mountain air. No noise, no pretense, just silence and peace. Every morning I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the water, feeling that strange mix of freedom and emptiness. I was free, but I had no one to share it with. At first, that silence was torture. I kept reaching for my phone, thinking I'd get a message from one of the kids. Maybe Sarah would say, "Dad, please come home." Maybe Ethan would send a text saying he missed me, but weeks went by. Then months. And not a word. I didn't blame them. They were young, confused, manipulated by their mother. Still, a father's heart doesn't stop caring even when it's shattered. Then one evening, and almost 6 months after the divorce, I got a call. It was from my lawyer. "Mr. Coleman, there's something you might want to know." "What is it?" "It's about your ex-wife. She and your old friend. They've been charged." My grip on the phone tightened. "Charged? For what?" "Fraud. Embezzlement. Apparently your friend used your name and company accounts years ago to secure illegal contracts. It's all coming out now. The authorities have enough evidence to indict them both." I sat there, silent. I felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction. Just a heavy calm. "Thank you for letting me know," I said quietly, and hung up. So this was how karma worked. Slowly, silently, but with precision, they had taken everything from me. But in their greed, They had destroyed themselves. 2 weeks later, I received another letter, this time from Dylan. The envelope was shaky, the handwriting sloppy, as if written in tears. Dad, I don't know where to start. Mom's in trouble. Uncle Greg's been arrested. She's saying she might go to prison. I don't know what to do. I know I said terrible things to you. I know we hurt you. But please, I just need to talk to you. Please answer me. I read it twice. Then 3 times. My hands trembled slightly, not from anger, but from something deeper. Regret. Because even though I'd been betrayed by their mother, those kids and they were still a part of me, one way or another, I spent that night walking along the lake thinking about everything. The laughter, the memories, the holidays, the first steps, the birthdays, all the moments that had felt real even if they weren't built on truth. Did biology really matter? Or was being a father about something more? By sunrise, I knew my answer. The next day, I drove back to my old town, after nearly 8 months of silence. When I reached the house, it looked nothing like before. The once manicured lawn was unkempt, the windows dusty, the mailbox overflowing. I knocked on the door. It opened slowly, and there stood Dylan. He froze. His eyes widened. Dad? I nodded. Hey, son. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His face was pale, his expression heavy with guilt and exhaustion. He stepped aside silently, and I walked in. The house felt cold, empty, like the soul had been drained out of it. Sarah sat on the couch, her eyes red from crying. Ethan was in the corner, staring blankly at the floor. When they saw me, Sarah ran up and hugged me tightly. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I held her close. For the first time in a long time, I felt tears burning behind my eyes. Ethan looked up, his voice shaking. We didn't know. We didn't know any of it. Mom said you were lying. I know, I said gently. You don't have to explain. Dylan, still standing near the kitchen, finally spoke. She's in jail, Dad. They're saying she might get 5 to 7 years. I nodded slowly. I heard. He looked down. We've lost everything. The house is under foreclosure. I tried to fix it, but I can't. I don't have that kind of money. I walked up to him. Dylan, listen to me. You may not be my blood, Pilou, but you'll always be my son. The same goes for your brother and sister. What happened wasn't your fault. He started crying, burying his face in his hands. I was so stupid. I treated you like you were nothing. I put my hand on his shoulder. Sometimes life has to break us before we can see who really loves us. That night I stayed with them. Cooked dinner, simple food, nothing fancy. For the first time in years, we ate together like a real family. No lies, no secrets, just quiet understanding. After dinner, Ethan brought out an old photo album. Pictures of our vacations, birthdays, anniversaries. And right there, among those pages of fake smiles, I realized something strange. Even though those memories were born from deceit, the happiness on those kids' faces was real. That was enough. I forgave them that night. Not for them, but for me. Because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting others off the hook. It was about freeing yourself from the past. A few months later, my lawyer helped me establish something new, a trust fund. Not for Laura, not for anyone from that past life, but for the kids' future, education, housing, stability. I didn't tell them the details. I just made sure they'd be taken care of anonymously. As for me, I returned to Colorado. But this time, when I watched the sunrise over the lake, I didn't feel the same emptiness. I felt peace, because sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. It's about walking away with your dignity intact, while the people who hurt you drown in their own choices. I had lost 20 years, yes, but I had gained something far greater. Truth. And that truth set me free. Years later, I got another letter, this time from Ethan. Dad, I graduated. Got my degree. I've started working at a law firm in Denver. Sarah's in college now. Dylan's doing better too. We talk about you all the time. We're trying to be the kind of people you'd be proud of. Thank you for not giving up on us. I love you. I smiled reading that. For the first time I felt proud again, not of money or success or image, but of life's strange, bittersweet way of coming full circle. Because in the end, the truth always wins. And love, real love, survives even betrayal.